Welcome to the Smith Publicity, all things book marketing podcast. The best tips, insights, and advice from the best in the publishing industry.
Hi, and welcome to the All Things Book Marketing podcast from Smith Publicity. I'm Andrea Thatcher, Marketing Manager and Book Publicist at Smith, and I'm here with a voice you're probably going to recognize, the founder and CEO of Smith Publicity himself, Dan Smith.
Hello, Andrea, and one thing is, my name is much easier than yours. Andrea
Fair point.
Thatcher.
Kiliani
Thatcher and Dan Smith. You have a much more exciting name. But anyway, I am happy to be here and glad you're hosting, and you can fire away with whatever you want to know about Dan Smith.
All right. Well, to give people a little bit of background, it started 20 years ago with one book, one client, in a cramped, tiny bedroom office. Dan Smith launched Smith Publicity from scratch, but working 20-hour days and unleashing creativity, imagination, and new, sometimes unorthodox strategies, the company grew quickly. Within 2 days of launching the very first Smith Publicity campaign, the client was on national television. As a result, it didn't take long for word of the new agency on the block to spread. Now, with thousands of books promoted, we stand as one of the premier book marketing agencies in the world. We employ the most talented book publicists in the industry with offices in New Jersey and Toronto. Our promotional reach is international, and we've worked with authors from over 15 countries. So, Dan, how did we get from there to here?
I have no idea. Well, I started out working for a publication called Radio TV Interview Report, which is still around in online form, I believe, and I was writing ads for them. Make a long story short, I was working at a university and on the side in my lunch breaks and at nights working for Radio TV Interview Report, and then decided one of the authors who I was writing an ad for asked me if I would do publicity for him. And I said yes and did it, and then a couple months later quit my job at the university and went on my own, and I think the first month I made $500. I actually still have the paper ledgers that I used to keep. And after the first client, word slowly started to spread. It was a good time to get into the business. So I was fortunate with timing because it was really at the advent of print-on-demand digital publishing. So there were a lot of authors coming onto the scene that were never had a chance before. So it was a combination of good timing, and I had some skill at it and was pretty good at it, and but was very fortunate. And from that one client in that very tiny bedroom office, as you said, 3,000 authors later, here we are.
Awesome. And what is the biggest change in the industry since you've opened Smith Publicity?
Well, anybody out there was in PR and is as old as I am will remember one of the biggest changes was, obviously, we started in 97. The internet was around, but it was still in its infancy. So there were no online media directories like we have now. So we had these big, giant green books. It was Bacon's at that time. And these books were 700 pages, one for radio, one for TV, one for newspaper, one for magazines. And so to contact media, you had to turn page after page and find the one you wanted, who had the right subject areas, and hand create your lists. And then another big change was at that time it was a lot of phone calls.
Right.
Email, again, was around, but wasn't anything like it is now. So media actually would take phone calls and not get angry. So the technology, obviously, in so many industries in the world has changed things, and it's certainly, transformed this industry. Now we have everything online with our media databases. We can be much more efficient, faster. But I do think some things have been lost that I am reminding the team about often is that we sometimes become too reliant on all this new technology, and it's okay to pick up the phone, and you should once in a while pick up the phone and call people and actually mail a letter instead of emailing a press release or a pitch and things like that. So I think the biggest changes are the technology, and also because of that technology, and print on demand, the number of authors is beyond comparison. I mean, I don't know the numbers in 97, but it went from basically just the traditional publishing houses to initially hundreds and then thousands and then hundreds of thousands of new authors every year. So it changed the technology, changed the entire industry across the board.
And how would you say that the changes in the media landscape have affected our work in positives and negatives?
How did the technology change things?
Well, the move from primarily reaching out to broadcast and newspapers. Now, newspapers are still a part of our outreach, but a much smaller part of our outreach, I would imagine. Fewer papers exist, and fewer papers that are around employ book reviewers. And there's obviously just the way the number of authors has multiplied, the number of outlets has multiplied with the advent of online media and blogging and all the bookstagrammers and all these things that didn't even exist. What has been helpful to our work about that, and what's been more challenging?
I think the plus side is, of course, that, as you alluded to with the internet, it just has infinitely expanded the opportunities for us to do our jobs in terms of getting authors exposure. Because unlike newspapers, physical newspapers and physical magazines, there are no column inch limitations. There's no space limitations for the most part, and there's places. Go to the Huffington Post and just see the incredible amount of information, articles, and all kinds of things they have there. So the internet has created so many additional opportunities. And also because the traditional newspapers and magazines, and I'll get to the point of what you said about many of them, the numbers reducing, but they now almost all have online equivalents, as you know. So you may not be able to get into the New York Times, but you may be able to get onto the New York Times website, or you may not be able to get an author on CNN broadcast, but you're able to get sometimes a broadcast interview. They have sections where they have actual online only interviews, or articles and Q&As and all the other kind of things we get. So it's really doubled the opportunities. And with newspapers, the one that's changed the most is newspapers, because there are fewer. And I had some numbers, I can't remember them now, but I mean, in the last 10 years, it's something like 30% of newspapers, or 40, something like that. I may not be exactly right about that, have closed their doors. So I think that's the biggest change. But along with that, the ones who are still around, almost all of them have trimmed their staffs, so they have fewer people to do the same amount of work. That's helped us because we help them do their job. So that part of it helps.
That's an interesting perspective on it. I hadn't really thought of that.
So there's fewer of them around, but they need our help more in terms of newspapers. The one I don't think broadcast, true live broadcast, radio and TV, I don't think that has changed too much. Again, where it's changed is, there could be things, there's, internet radio, and of course there's podcasts now, which are different. They're not exactly broadcast, but, and interviews can be, MP3s online, and people can listen to them that way. But in terms of what we do, I don't think, and in terms of trying to get somebody on the Today Show, really hasn't changed that much. Or trying to get people radio interviews, which we're doing every day, I don't think that has changed too much. But newspapers and magazines, and then the opportunities the internet provides, have certainly significantly impacted things. And I mentioned podcasts such as ours, and we now have people trying to get on our podcast. So,
yes.
And podcasts are becoming increasingly important and influential. Great opportunities for authors. And then there's blog tours and social media and all that. But I would say Those are the biggest changes that I've seen.
Yeah, and a little personal trivia. I started out in print newspapers. I had a journalism degree, and that's what I wanted to do. But then it quickly became apparent that they were not going to be around forever. And the newspaper I worked at, Elizabethtown Chronicle, is now closed, sadly, along with a lot of regional newspapers. But I think, further to what you said about how maybe if we can't get an author in the print edition of Newsweek, perhaps they'll be online. I think sometimes there's a perceived bias towards print by the author. The author wants to see their article in print in Newsweek or what have you, whatever the magazine or newspaper might be. But I always like to point out that they're actually going to reach more people in the online equivalent. I mean, more people are reading the Newsweek website or the New York Times website than are reading the physical print copies. So I think sometimes while there's some prestige to being in the print edition, if you're really looking at it practically about getting your message out to the most people, sometimes it's even better to be in the online space.
I guess the perfect combination is when, I'm sure this still happens a lot, where you get both.
Right, yeah. That's the ideal.
Because just like a TV interview or a newspaper or a radio interview, it's one and done if there was no internet equivalent. You know, people get the paper a day and then they
Only once since I've been here have I had someone run something in print that wasn't available online, and they sent me a PDF. But that's only happened the one time. And what lessons from the way you used to do publicity before the internet really took over still hold true for promoting a book today?
From our core methodology of how we do things, and certainly we've enhanced things and we've added things and we've had to change and adapt and stay ahead of changes and keep up with the industry. But our core system hasn't changed. In fact, our press release format, as you know, and press releases are being used differently now, and that's another subject. But the format, length, and the style and the way, and it's a very specific Smith Publicity style, as you know, that we have an interview release that is really something I created. There really was no interview release. There was always the classic press release. So those things haven't changed. I think it's just a matter of we've stayed with our kind of, again, the core methodology of how we promote an author in a book. But all through these 20 years, we've enhanced those services, some based on technology, and just continually trying to improve our service and add things that produce the best results for authors. And we're still always looking to what value can we add to our services, rather than just radio and TV and newspaper, magazine. Now we have social media and blog tours, and it's a matter of the fundamentals haven't changed, but the resources and opportunities and the things we employ to do our jobs and to make the things happen. There's been advances and certainly changes there, but fundamentally it's the same approach. It's just a point of, as it was 20 years ago in 1997, our job was to make authors stand out from the crowd and get noticed. It was easier then because there weren't as many authors around. Now we have many, many, many more authors vying for the same attention. So it's really it made us get better and more creative as needed because there's just so much more competition now.
And I think it was really interesting, too, when we talked about internally strategies and things that you used back then that are still useful. The way headline writing hasn't changed all that much.
No, it hasn't.
And so, not only is the headline something that, we would still use the same, process and strategies for the press release, but you just kind of migrated over to the email subject line. There's so much research out there now about subject lines that get people to open your emails and things like that. It's a little different.
And the subject line is really equivalent to the headline.
Exactly.
For the most part.
It's the same strategies apply, even though there's...
Like we used to say, and we still do, the headlines on a press release should be, try to be 10 to 12 words, and no more, shorter the better. But as you're saying, with subject lines, because of the way, different email platforms, they show it depends on how somebody has their screen organized, they may see the first 5 words, they may see 10 words, and we're always, making sure that we keep those subject lines. I mean, you're still in the trenches as a publicist, in addition to being marketing manager now, and that you have that subject line has to be, every word has to be thought of very carefully, because you don't know how much they're going to see.
And it's always interesting to do some A/B testing too. If people are, reaching out in that way that are listening today, it's always interesting to test your instinct for your subject line with maybe half your list, and then the other half do something a little bit different or a little bit more experimental, and see which one pulls better. So that's one tactic that we use to kind of always be honing and always improving our press materials.
And I think another change that we talked about just a little bit is how press releases are still important, but now often publicists sometimes won't use them and just use the pitch. And that's a big change. We used to always, when there was less competition, we could just send a press release out.
Yeah.
But over the years, since more and more competition, we rely more heavily on personalized pitches, and sometimes just the pitch alone, which I know the team uses. Some use more, and maybe they'll put the press release below, maybe they won't. Sometimes it's just 2 paragraphs.
It's almost like a step has been added to the process, because I still do use press release for almost every, piece of interest that is going to lead to some sort of placement, but I don't use it until the interest is secured. So to get the interest, I use the pitch, and then I kind of start with the press release part of the process.
Exactly.
But a lot of our publicists do it all different ways, and
I think the press releases are still the foundation.
Yeah.
And when a book is sent out, we include them, and
because
so
the journalist needs that information at their fingertips. They're going to get something wrong about the synopsis or the author or the book title or the publisher if they don't have all that spelled out for them, just because it's, again, it's kind of helping them do their job. Like, they'd have to go to 5 different resources to find all that out if we didn't have it for them right there on the press release. And so I really think of it as an informational resource for the end product of, our outreach, that, it'll go into their piece or their interview or their placement in some way.
Right.
And so authors are often asking us for a blueprint for success. Do you think there is such a thing? And if so, what? If not, some best practices?
One of the things speaking to anybody who's listening and has probably heard this before, is to start early if you can, especially with social media. And Andrea is also a social media specialist. So in an ideal world, the best blueprint for success is to start well in advance of the book even being out, even being finished.
Yeah.
And start, for example, developing a social media following. And and again, that's not always possible, and we deal with, as you know, authors come to us at every phase. Book may have been out a year or is a year away, but ideally, if you can start early, that's would be the number one thing on the blueprint for success. The other thing, it's a little controversial in some ways, is I tell people, more nonfiction books, that keep publicity and marketing in mind when you're writing the book. You, if possible, you want your message to be your message and your advice or whatever to be your advice, but think of what you're going to do when it's out and incorporate that, try to incorporate marketing-friendly things, publicity-friendly things into your book. And that may mean, shortening chapters or, making it easier to excerpt things. So, but it can make a big difference. I can tell a difference if somebody truly has written a business book, for example, with publicity in mind, the difference, I can see the difference immediately when I look at a book and go through it. So that's another, it doesn't really apply to fiction, but that's something, although it can, I shouldn't say that, because with fiction, there are things authors can include that would possibly create more opportunities. If you're writing your novel and you incorporate certain landmarks or certain restaurants or places that you could, real places, and obviously the reason behind that is then you can possibly have an event at that place because it's featured in the book. So it does apply to fiction in other ways too. And but it basically, I think with fiction, if you can include some real life things in it, that could create some opportunities.
I think too with fiction, it's more about thinking about the marketplace a little bit, and this is also controversial. A lot of authors don't understand how different books are fit into different genres. You see it a lot with young adult fiction, YA, they call it. People don't understand, why is this book YA? When The Handmaid's Tale was published, it has a young female protagonist. It may have been called YA. We consider it, regular adult fiction now, but there's so many examples of books that could have been YA in the past, but are, considered regular adult fiction. And now, in the current marketplace, you really have to think more when you're writing your book about the genre it's going to fit into. And if you're not thinking about it at the outset, I guarantee that your agent or your publisher are going to be thinking about it as soon as they pick it up. So right. I think that's a way that you can be thinking about how you would market your book from the beginning, and it might affect the tone of your writing a little bit, or the themes that you develop. And some authors don't want to be thinking about that. They just want to write the book that they have inside them. They
want their book to be taken on literary merit and not.
Yeah,
and I get that, but I think the other element of blueprint for success, as you put it, is to be prepared and know ahead of time that it's going to be difficult to get. There's so much competition that whether you're promoting on your own or you hire an agency, it's not easy. And you're up against a lot of competition, and it's hard to get significant book sales, for example. Yeah. People do it all, authors do it all the time, and we help them do it all the time, but it's not easy. And I don't mean to be negative. It's just to have realistic expectations of what is going to follow. So it's not really being negative. It's just being realistic, that knowing it's not too many things in life are easy, and this isn't easy either when you're trying to get attention for your book and trying to get exposure. And knowing your competition and knowing just helps you plan better. But I still think, I always tell authors that even if they're paying us a lot of money to promote the book, I want them to have fun. Yeah. We know it's an investment. Sometimes a very big investment. Sometimes smaller, whatever. It's still money, and it's business. But it doesn't mean it can't be fun. It could be a once in a lifetime experience. You're doing 20 radio interviews. You're on TV. Yeah. You may never pass that way again. So to enjoy it. It's kind of off topic, but it made me think of it that looking ahead with realism, but being optimistic and looking to have a great experience.
Yeah, and it depends, I guess, a little on personality type, but again, talking about being negative versus being realistic, I think there's an instinct with some authors to, because you're so close to the project and most of the people who you shared your project with are also close to it, there's an instinct to always be thinking, this type of person and that type of person, all these people will be interested in my book because it applies to so many different things, and it's easy for you to make those connections and find reasons why everyone will be interested in your book. Whereas I feel like as the publicist, we have to be cognizant of all the reasons why someone might reject the book and have an argument for that. Have something to go back with. Oh, I pitched this book to you, and there's a major romance element. You say you don't review romance. Well, you review a lot of historical fiction. Here are some historical fiction aspects of the book that you might not have noticed that you'd be interested in. So, but I think as an author, you do have to be cognizant that people may not be immediately as automatically receptive to your book as you might hope or expect they would be, and so the work is in making your book receptive to the audience in a way, positioning your book for the audience. And I think that's a skill and a strategy that is difficult even for seasoned publicists. And so that's often something that authors need the most help with. Yep,
I agree.
Any other best practices that you would recommend?
The last one I would mention, there's a lot, but the last one I'd mention, which I think is very important, is for authors to be willing, and we kind of touched upon this, but be willing to be creative and understand that you may have to, not always, but you may have to get quite creative or allow a publicist to get quite creative with how they position you. I think when it comes to fiction, we sometimes have a hard time when an author just wants it taken on literary merit alone with no angles and just... Yeah. It's hard, but to open yourself up to being creative with how you're positioning yourself or having a publicist position you.
And that's the way I feel like the publicist is often a little more positive, because I feel like often, and maybe this happens a little more with nonfiction, often there will be an opportunity that I think an author is perfect for, and they're like, well, I don't really think I'm the expert on that, or I don't know if I know everything about that, but we can see in your book how your book relates to this opportunity, and we can help coach you on that and help you figure out which elements of your book to bring forth to be pertinent to this opportunity. So I do feel like the publicist can sometimes be a little bit more positive than the author in terms of what we see you as a fit for. And it's always a good idea. I mean, not everything is going to be a fit that we present to you, but it's a good idea to keep your mind open and listen to the ways which we think we could make your book or your expertise a fit for this opportunity.
And it kind of goes along with something I've been saying for 20 years, is that you are what we say you are. If we say you're an expert, you're an expert because
you've written a book.
You have the credibility, and don't be shy. And there's subjective things like if we call somebody one of the world's leading authorities. I mean, and we don't just make these things up. If someone has a credibility, you've written a book, and it might be merited, but who's going to argue with that? Well, no, I'm one of. Like you're saying and things like that. And I think one other thing I would add is to if an author hires a publicist, to trust them, because you're investing your hard-earned money in a professional, and we want input, we want collaboration, we want ideas, and we're open to hearing all kinds of ideas from our authors. But trust, you're hiring a professional just like in any other business, and trust them. Whether it's us or many of the other fine agencies that are out there, you've hired them because you believe they know what they're doing, so let them do it.
Yeah. We don't try and write your book. So we know we can't do that part. We don't claim that we could. But we know that we can do the publicity.
No, you do the hard stuff, authors. We do the easy part.
We're just getting it out there. I know in all your years and experience, you've had some interesting clients and opportunities. You mentioned being creative, and sometimes authors are a little overly creative, where you have to be especially creative. Did you have any stories that you wanted to share with us today?
Do you have a couple hours? Well, it's more interesting. What's interesting is when the amazing people very early on that I worked with, and at that time when it was just me, I had to put food on the table, so I really never turned anybody down because I couldn't. But so I dealt with all kinds of really interesting people, and that I'll never forget. And they not only helped, I thank them for helping me start my business, but for the experience. And I mean, there's just a few that come to mind early on were people who were UFO abductees.
Oh, okay.
And several people who believe they communicate with the dead, and on to a couple of reincarnations. One author believed he was the reincarnation of Jesus. Another one was the reincarnation of Tsar Nicholas III.
You've had some luminaries.
Yes. And my very first client, his name is Arnie Nuremberg, and he won't mind me saying this, because he was client zero. He was number one. And the way I got him on national TV was because I sent out a press release that said, the coffin treatment for wayward teens. And Arnie's a Columbia-trained psychologist, very esteemed, and he came up with something called death visualization therapy, where he would actually, as part of a therapy for difficult teens, he had a funeral parlor in his office, and he would take them in. And
now, did you do this therapy? Did you try it out?
No, I got in a coffin once, just for fun.
For fun.
That's another story. But and so it was just such a fun one early on, and he ended up on the Montel show at the time.
Oh yeah.
And another one I can't remember. I don't know if it's still around, but even now I think that would work. You make a pitch. Death, coffin treatment for wayward teens. I think it would still pull. Because it's so interesting.
There's something about coffins. A publisher that I've worked with in the past had a book about building your own coffin, and it was one of our most requested things for media. People would just find it and find it so bizarre that they want to cover it, and so it continued to pull for many years.
Well, in relation to Arnie, something that spawned from that I don't know if I've ever talked with anybody about it, was we were thinking of the Gothic movement was really exploding or coming into its own at that time. And
I was a little goth in 97.
I can imagine. Angela's great. Andrea's crazy. So, but we considered the idea of creating a business that would sell coffins as beds. Because
Interview with the Vampire fans.
Yeah, because some people were sleeping in coffins, and we were talking about equipping it with music, and but then when it got just a step further, we realized that the shipping cost would be a little much, and then we ran into a little fact of we may need air holes.
Maybe you need to write a book about a character who starts that business.
Yeah, but who knows? Maybe if we had started it, it would have been
Maybe Smith Publicity wouldn't even be here.
Yeah, I'll just try to think of a few quick others. There was a woman. I think her name was Sri Shanti Adiva Duty, and she could levitate.
Well.
Yep, she could levitate.
So did you get some levitation coverage?
I didn't see it, but I've seen videos of her at the time where she was levitating. She would lift herself up into the air over a crowd. We also got into promoting a cult early on.
Oh.
Yeah. Cults need publicity too.
Cults need publicity. Sometimes more than others.
Yeah, and the fellow who was who believed he was a reincarnation of Jesus, he was adamant about having an event in the desert in Arizona in which he would be on a cross.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no!
Yeah, and I told him his first name was John. I said, John. I said that's it can offend some people, and that's. I like the creativity, but that's going too far. But he honestly, I wouldn't have done it because it was too crazy, and it could certainly offend people. But in talking to him, I said, "Well, I guess you what would you have, Velcro straps or something? He actually wanted to be nailed.
Oh my gosh.
He wanted to be nailed.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's commitment.
Yeah.
I admire the commitment
He
to
was
publicity.
going to do it. He was going to do it.
Saved a life.
I backed out of that one, but he was going to do that and to reflect with authenticity the death of Christ. He was going to be nailed. He was absolutely serious about it.
Sometimes we need to rein them in.
Yeah, so those are some of the early on people. And I always say with him, I say, he disappeared on me. And at last I heard he got arrested in Montreal. Again, this is 20 years ago. And but I always say Jesus bounced a check on me because his check bounced.
Oh, well, there's a soundbite for you.
Jesus bounced a check on me.
Well, thank you so much for telling us some of your stories and your wisdom.
Well, thank you, Andrea. It was fun. And I would like to definitely do this again sometime.
Absolutely. We're going to have more members of the team coming on the podcast to talk to you. They may not all have quite as interesting stories, but we'll do our best. We'd love to know who's out there listening. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or a question to ask our team, reach out on your favorite social media. We're at Smith Publicity on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Or you can email Andrea at smithpublicity.com. Thanks for listening to the All Things Book Marketing Podcast. Smith Publicity is celebrating 20 years of powerful publicity and proven results. And you can visit us at smithpublicity.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Smith Publicity All Things Book Marketing Podcast. To reach us and learn about our many book marketing services, visit www.smithpublicity.com or send us an email to info@smithpublicity.com.